Good afternoon. My name is Kent Mormon, and I am the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee, known as DRCOG TAC. I call to order the January 25th, 2021 DRCOG TAC meeting. As a reminder, for agenda item questions and comments, please use the raise hand button to indicate you have a question or would like to speak. Once it is your turn, staff will unmute your microphone and call on you to speak. Please make sure you are also unmuted on your end. Today I wasn't when I was talking to staff. Please state who you are and who you represent, and then proceed speaking. If you have any technical questions, you can direct those to staff in the question box. Again, please use the raise hand feature to ask any questions related to the agenda items. At this time, Cam, will you list all attendees? If for some reason you do not hear your name, please email Cam at ckennedy@drcog.org so your name can be added to the record. Cam?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. In attendance, I see Alex Hyde-Wright, Amy Hopkins, Andrea Leray, Art Griffith, Bill Suros, Brooke Svoboda, Brian Weimer, Carol Buchanan, Carson Priest, Chris Chauvin, Chris Hudson, Christina Fairfield, Daniel Hutton, Danny Herman, Don Sluter, Danielle Suber, Elizabeth Relford, Elliot Skolsky, Eugene Howard, Evan Brigham, George Hollenkoff, Holly Rogan, James Usen, Jan Rowe, Jean Sanson, Jeff Dackenbring, Jennifer Carpenter, Jeremy Haywood, Jessica Meckelbust, John Cotton, Josie Hadley, Julie George, Karen Schneider, Kelly Heaton, Kevin Ash, Laramie Nemo, Lisa Nguyen, Lisa Skakata, Mac Callison, Matthew Helfant, Megan Davis, Michael Romero, Mike Whitaker, Phil Greenwald, Piper Darlington, Sangu Lee, Sarah Castro, Sarah Grant, Stephen Strominger, Steve Duran, Tammy Meyer, Thomas Riff, and TJ Scarberry. Those are the names I see, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, you might be muted on your end.
Thank you, Cam. Just a reminder, if you were not listed by Cam, just email him at ckennedy@drcog.org. I'd also like to announce at this time that Bill Soroy has been made the official RTD to the TAC, and I know he's been attending quite regularly anyway. So congratulations, Bill. We'll now open the meeting for public comment. If you have joined by computer, please raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button, and we will call on you to begin speaking. If you have joined by phone, please unmute yourself by pressing the *6 on your phone. You will have 3 minutes to speak, after which we will ask you to wrap up your comments and your line will be muted. Cam, please unmute all participants at this time. And do we have any hands raised?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I don't see any hands raised at this moment.
Okay. Is there anyone on the phone that would like to speak?
Excuse me, I did have my hand raised.
Oh, okay.
May
Go
I
ahead.
proceed?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Holly Rogan. I am a trustee for the Town of Lyons. I'm here to represent the Town of Lyons and to tell the committee that Lyons is strongly in favor of the increased federal share to assist local governments with a local match burden, particularly as a small town and given current and anticipated budget constraints. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Public comments? Cam, if you'll, at this time, we'll end the public comment time. And Cam, if you'll please take a moment to mute everyone.
Okay, Mr. Chair, they've been muted.
All right. I would also like to announce that I believe, just a moment here, I just lost my screen. There we go. That this is Karen Schneider's last meeting. As I understand, she's retiring from CDOT. So congratulations, Karen, on your retirement, and you will be missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your words are appreciated.
With that, did you have any additional you wanted to say, Karen?
I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of the DRCOG staff. You know, Region 4 plays such a small role in the Denver area, but what we do has such impact. And DRCOG staff and DRCOG members have been such a joy to work with, and especially this group, this TAC. It's been just an amazing opportunity to get to know so many people and really just to positively change communities with the decisions that this group makes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. At this time, we'll move on to the December TAC meeting and January TAC workshop summary notes. Is there any discussion or questions about the are there any questions or concerns about the meeting summaries on either one? If you would like to speak on that, please raise your hand. Kim, do we have any hands raised?
I do see one hand raised from Steve Duran. So Steve, you're unmuted. So when you're ready, please go ahead.
Yes, hi, Steve Durian with Jefferson County. I'm just passing along. Kenneth Johnson couldn't make it to this meeting today, but he did want me to pass along that he was in attendance at the January 11th meeting. He's an alternate for Jefferson County from Wheat Ridge, and I believe the appropriate place would be for him would be under additional, I think, the category of additional attendees. Thank you.
Thank you,
Steve. Any other hands raised, Kim?
Yes, I do see another hand raised, this time from Elizabeth Relford. Elizabeth, you're unmuted, so when you're ready, please go ahead.
Just for the January 11th minutes, since Kevin Ash, our primary TAC representative, wasn't in attendance at meeting, I think I should be listed under the alternates for that rather than public. Good.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll note that. Any other changes?
I do see a hand raised, Mr. Chair, from Megan Davis. Megan, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Yes, I believe the minutes also reflected that Jean Sanson who was also on the meeting, but she is not from the city of Louisville. I don't know if Jean's on today, but I wanted to just make that additional correction.
Thank you. We'll get it noted to the correct location, to the correct organization.
Thank you, Ken.
Any other hands raised, Cam?
No, Mr. Chair, not at this time.
Okay. Then we'll, with those corrections that we've noted, the minutes will stand approved. At this time, we'll now move into our action items. The first one will be presented by Todd Cottrell. It's the 2020-2023 Transportation Improvement Program TIP amendments. And Todd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So as the chair said, we do have amendments for your consideration this afternoon, and we have 4 of them. The first is being a new project from Castle Rock. They received $5.4 million in a build grant for pre-construction activities for the I-25 and Crystal Valley interchange. The second is also a new project, and this is using $9.7 million of CDOT's COVID relief funding. And this is for the construction of I-70 noise walls, which will rebuild walls along the entire stretch of I-70 within the metro area. The third project is from CDOT Region 4 for the I-25 State Highway 119 interchange and park and ride improvements. This will add $6.1 million in construction funding in FY21. And finally, for the Region 1 I-25 Valley Highway project, this project adds funding for the purchase of the Burnham Yard property and consists of $45 million in HPTE loans and $15.5 million in Senate Bill 267 money. So those are the 4 amendments for your consideration this afternoon. So unless you have any comments or questions, the motion before you is to recommend to the RTC amendments to the 2023 Transportation Improvement Program.
Are there any questions for Todd? If so, please raise your hand or *6 to unmute. Cam, do we have any that have raised their hands?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The first hand I see is from Art Griffith. So Art, you've been unmuted. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Yes. 2 things. My first is a question related to the I-25 Valley Highway. What's the total pot? I mean, we're on the front page, and I was wondering if you could scroll ahead. What's the total pot of money for that project? I think it showed up later, but was depending on your screen there.
I believe that amount, Art, is $61 million.
Okay, great. And my other is I'd like to make a motion to approve this recommendation.
I think there's been a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, I see a hand raised from Brian Weimer. Brian, when you're ready, please go ahead.
I second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Please raise your hand. Cam, are any hands raised?
No, Mr. Chair, not at this time.
If you would please unmute the members, and we'll vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. At this time, we'll move on to our next action item, which is the fiscal year 20, fiscal year 21 Unified Planning Work Program, the UPWP amendment. And Todd, I believe you have that one also.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So before you are amendments to the fiscal year 2021 Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP. So if you recall, the UPWP is a required document and serves as the tool for the scheduling, budgeting, and monitoring of the planning activities for the NPO. So these amendments before you this afternoon include adjustments to the tasks and deliverables. So just a few of the more notable items. These include additional MetroVision deliverables in Objective 3, including conducting additional research into COVID-19. Begin DRCOG-led corridor planning services within Activity 3.3, and updating the congestion mitigation toolkit as outlined in Activity 5.1. So a complete list of all the adjustments and amendments that are made and proposed are included within the attachment within track changes. So the ones I listed are just sort of the highlights, but there certainly are many more. Also, for your information, staff is beginning the process to create a new UPWP document covering federal fiscal years 22 and 23. We'll kick this off here next month at your meeting by providing sort of an overview of the work products over the last 2 years, and then also some of the expected work items covering federal fiscal years 22 and 23. So I'll be happy to take any comments or questions you may have, but the motion before you is to recommend to the RTC amendments to the 2021 UPWP.
Thank you, Todd. If you have any questions for Todd, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do see one hand raised from Phil Greenwald. Phil, you're unmuted, so when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you both. This is Phil Greenwald from the City of Longmont. Just wanted to ask a quick question from Todd. If we have some or related items that might be changes, could we certainly, I guess, send those to you via email and have them reviewed, or how would you like to proceed with that, with any kind of corrections?
Right. Certainly, if you think there's something that's incorrect or you might consider to add, feel free to email us. We can certainly take those. And depending on when we receive those, we might be able to even bring those to the RTC and the board for adoption to the document.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it.
Kim, are there any other hands raised?
No, I don't see any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We'll now entertain a motion and a second for approval of this agenda item. Please use the raise hand icon to indicate you would like to make the motion.
I do see one hand raised, Mr. Chair, from Mr. Art Griffith. Art, please go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, but I was wondering if Phil was wanting to share any of the changes since this is a motion. Phil, I was wondering if you had some changes that we should at the TAC know about before we make a motion. So I would make a motion, but subject to hearing what Phil might have to add.
And Art, I don't know whether these will be accepted by DRCOG or not, but the Boulder County representative group would like to add US 287 planning to that effort, Louisville and County Road, or sorry, Colorado State Highway 42, the Lafayette Multimodal Transportation Plan, and then Vision Zero plan through Boulder County, and then also Longmont has Envision Longmont Update, which is our comprehensive plan. So those would be the things that we would talk about adding, or at least send them to DRCOG for review.
Are those added under the local piece of that?
Correct, under the local piece that is locally funded.
Bill, this is Ron Papsdorf. If they're locally funded and they are the information is correct for work through the end of this UPWP, which ends September 30th of this year. I don't think DRCOG's staff has any opposition to including that fix in this amendment. We can get that forwarded in the RTC and board action items.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Art.
So Art, does your motion include those changes?
Absolutely.
Okay. We have a motion. If you have a second, please raise your hand and Cam will call on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see a hand raised from Brian Weimer again. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Brian Weimer, Arapahoe County. I second the motion with the additions as referenced previously.
Thank you, Brian. Is there any further discussion? Please raise your hand.
I do see a hand raised from Megan Davis. Megan, you're unmuted, so please go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was just a second, so I'll take it down.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised now, Mr. Chair.
Okay, at this time, if you'd unmute everybody so we can vote.
Okay.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. We'll move right along to our next action item, Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, the FAST Act 2021 safety targets. And I understand that Alvin Bedell Sanchez will be making this presentation. Go ahead, Alvin Bedell. I think you may be muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. So as mentioned, I'm coming before you all again to discuss another federal performance measure area that DRCOG is setting. This is the one we're probably most familiar with. It's our safety targets. We set these every year, either in December or January for the upcoming performance period. As these are the federal measures, the process is pretty well prescribed either through the rulemakings or the federal guidance we've received. So for us, DRCOG has elected to set targets that are specific to the MPO region. That covers all public roads within our MPO area. And we get the data from the Colorado Department of Transportation every year. The performance measures are the number and rate of fatalities, the number and rate of serious injuries, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. And the calculation is based on a 5-year rolling average. As with all the federal measures, which are very near term and short term, targets are intended to be realistic and achievable. Now, since these are targets specific to the MPO area, you can see that's the green area on this map. We get data from CDOT that's already been geolocated to crashes on their system. It's then up to our GIS team to geolocate the remaining crashes off system within our MPO area. Since this will be the 4th cycle where we're taking this action, we wanted to provide a snapshot of the status on our previous 3 cycles of targets. You can see whether we've been achieving them or not achieving them according to the federal standard. As 2020 did just finish, we don't have data available for that yet to determine whether we've achieved or not achieved those 2020 targets. We'll get those later this year from CDOT. Since the federal targets came into play, DRCOG has taken some actions to achieve both the federal targets as well as our regional safety targets. In our most recent TIP, there were 115 projects that improved safety. Those totaled about 1.9 billion. As y'all are aware, the board adopted Taking Action on Regional Vision Zero last summer, and we're currently in development of a Complete Streets Toolkit whose findings and recommendations are being incorporated into the 2050 MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan. And then in addition, in the MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan, we've included a project list and program list for arterial safety and regional vision zero. So actually programming some of the potential revenues towards safety in the long range plan. Since this is the next cycle of federal targets that are coming after the board has adopted taking action on regional vision zero, we did bring this item before the board last December to get their perspective on the time frame for setting these targets. As you can see, we asked questions related to the time frame for zero fatalities. You can see the majority were in 2040. And we also asked about the time frame for zero serious injuries. This one was more across the board, but the perspectives from the board guided DRCOG's staff's recommendation for those safety targets. Now, since we are pivoting from our previous method to a new method, we did want to provide an overview of what those looked like. So for the last 3 cycles, we've used the MetroVision 2040 traffic fatality targets of fewer than 100 to set our fatality target. When it came to serious injuries, we took an approach of holding the line. So despite increases in employment, population, and vehicle miles traveled, we wanted to prevent serious injuries from increasing. And then our non-motorized targets were based on a combination of both of those methods. The new method that we're moving towards is the one outlined in our taking action on regional vision zero. So 0 fatalities and 0 serious injuries. For that, we're setting a 0 fatality target year of 2040 and a 0 serious injury target year of 2045. Now to show what that looks like, just compared to past data, for fatalities, we would need an average yearly reduction of 13 fatalities to achieve a 0 fatality target by 2040. In terms of serious injuries, you've seen we've done pretty well holding the line as we were striving to do. This one sets a 0 serious injury target by 2045, and to achieve that, we would need an average yearly reduction of 68 serious injuries every year. And then the non-motorized target setting takes into account both approaches. So 0 non-motorized fatalities by 2040 and 0 non-motorized serious injuries by 2045. So you can see what those respective reductions on average would be to achieve this target. With that, our proposed targets are shown on the screen. They're also included in the memo in the attack packet. These will be included in a future board resolution. As you can see, the 2021 targets cover a 5-year period from 2017 to 2021. So 4 of those 5 years have already occurred. Next steps following TAC endorsement would be bringing this before the RTC and the board in February to meet our federal deadline of February 27th to have these targets established. And then one plug before we get to the motion, we have set up a new performance measures webpage on the DRCOG website. We're hoping this acts as a resource for local, regional, state, federal partners. It will have the latest information for these targets and these presentations that we're showing to the board, as well as the reports that DRCOG does to show our progress in achieving these targets. So with that, our request and motion is to move to recommend to the RTC the 2021 safety targets as required by the FAST Act.
Thank you, Alvin Bedell. Are there any questions? If so, please raise your hand and Cam will call on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do see a hand raised from Brian Weimer. Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you. My question really deals around one of the metrics, and it has to do with vehicle miles traveled. So my question is, how do you obtain that vehicle miles traveled? And more importantly, is that data available or segregated by county so that we could utilize it by individual jurisdiction, or in our case, the Arapahoe County?
Hey, Brian. Yep, good question. We use VMT from our own calculations. It is available by county. We have provided that number before for specific county requests that we have gotten.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any additional questions, Cam?
Thank you. I do see another hand raised from Alex Hyde-Wright. So Alex, you're unmuted, so take it away when you're ready.
Hi, Alvin, thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to extend a larger thanks to all the DRCOG staff who've had a hand in the taking action on Regional Vision Zero. I certainly appreciate shepherding this conversation through the board. I think it's one of the most urgent priorities within the transportation work that we're doing. I had a couple questions on the targets. I don't know if it'd be helpful to go back to the previous slide. I think at the beginning of the presentation, I guess a question is, it looks like the 21 targets cover the years 2017 through 2021. And as you noted, 4 of those years had already happened. And so I'm trying to figure out why we're setting targets for mostly years that have already happened and not setting targets for what we want to achieve looking forward to the next 5 years.
Right, so part of that is just a result of these coming down to federal rulemakings. So the process for most of our federal measures is really prescribed. It tells us which data to use, what time frame to look at. Overall, they're very near term. So while we are pivoting our larger approach to Regional Vision Zero, these targets are, as you can see, 4 of the 5 years have passed, so they're near term, and we need to set targets that are achievable for this near term. But we are moving them in the methodology to get us to 0 by 2040 and 2045 for fatalities and serious injuries, respectively.
That kind of tees up my next question, which is from the chart of ramping down to 0 fatalities by 2040. It shows that we need to reduce fatalities by an average of 13 per year. But then the 2021 target, I think, was only 3 fatalities less than the 2019 target. So I guess I'm not quite sure why, if our target is, now 2 years later than the previous target, shouldn't it be 26 fatalities lower instead of 3 fatalities if we're trying to go down by 13 per year?
Right, so part of that is a result of this being a 5-year average. So let me just go back to fatalities. Since we do have these peaks and valleys with the data, we carry that data forward through that 5-year rolling average. So while we are setting 2021 targets, we need to take into account the 2017, 18, 19, 20 data that's already occurred. So our 2021 target pushes us towards this negative 13 fatality, but we have to keep these valleys and peaks in our calculations.
Okay, but and then again,
does that answer your question, Alex, on that?
I think so, but so I guess to clarify, the 5 years that our target has to average over, that's set by the US DOT?
Yes, yep. The calculation that I do is just a straight trend line of negative 13 fatalities to get us to 2040, but the 5-year rolling average needs to take into account the previous 4 years of data that have occurred and what we would like the 2021 value to be.
When you say we'd like the 2021 value to be, is that what we'd like the number of crashes in 2021 to be, or that's what we'd like the 2021 target to be?
The 2021 value.
It'd be at the 5-year average in 2021 to account for this yearly 13 crash reduction a year. Is that correct, Alex?
I think that answers my question. I guess
or Alvin.
I guess I'm still struggling with the concept of setting targets based on years that have mostly already happened. But if that's set by the US DOT, then I guess there's not a whole lot that can be done about that. But it sort of seems like a strange concept is what I'm struggling with.
Right, that's a strange quirk of the federal measures across the board.
Okay, well, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you for asking, Alex. Any additional hands raised, Cam?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I see another hand raised from Eileen Yazzie. Eileen, you're unmuted, so please go ahead.
Sure, hi, this is Eileen Yazzie from Denver. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Kind of continuing Alex's train of thought, this is one of my questions is there any value of recognizing the federal requirement and calculation, but then doing kind of a DRCOG target? Am I making sense? And I think it just goes back with, while recognizing the 5-year average, again, to meet our 2040 goal. It seems as if we need to do more than that -3 fatalities, just looking at the screen. I mean, does it make sense, or would that be too confusing as related to recognizing the federal calculation, but then kind of setting something a bit more aggressive to understanding our goal?
Thanks, Eileen. I think part of that is achieved through our MetroVision targets. This is just our first step towards aligning our overall targets for safety to Vision Zero.
Do you mind going and flashing the motion back again, just so I can, does it say? It's 2021.
Yeah, a weird quirk of our schedule is that these targets need to be set by February, but we're also adopting our regional transportation plan in April, and then we're hoping to amend our MetroVision. We're going to amend our MetroVision targets for safety past that as well. So this is just the first step towards getting us to our Vision Zero targets.
Okay.
This is Ron. Alvin, you've been doing a great job on this, and I've just been listening in, and I want to try to address Eileen and Alex's comments because they're important. And I think what we've all struggled with, and we've quite frankly struggled with this since the adoption of taking action on Vision Zero, when we all had a big conversation about this, we're in some ways connecting to sort of different things. And it's really important to us, and I think to the region, and we heard that at the board last year when we adopted taking action on Vision Zero, to articulate that our goal, our target is 0 fatalities. We're taking a first step here to try to reflect that as part of an annual required step that we have to take to adopt federal safety standards under the FAST Act. So we're connecting two different things, but we're doing it in a way that we hope over time will show progress towards our ultimate goal of reaching 0 fatalities. And that's where I think the connection of this makes it a little bit more confusing. So the recommendation today, the action by the RTC and the board will be to adopt that 2021 safety target as required for the FAST Act. What we're doing is we're basing this target on our ultimate goal of reaching 0 fatalities by 2040. And so that's where it's a little weird, right? Because the federal targets, the federal tracking is based on a 5-year rolling average. So if you saw that graph, Alvin, if you can go back to the graph of the fatal crashes over time, yeah, that one. You can see that what we really need to do is reduce from 270 going to 2021, and that's what that trend line will get us. And the federal target will actually get us there. The only difference is the federal target for 2021 is based on on that 5-year rolling average, Alex. So that's where it gets, as to use your word, quirky.
Hey, Ron and Alvin, this is Eileen Yazzie. Again, if I could, I think then maybe understand, I think Alvin answered my part of the question about, is this any different? Like, how does this connect with MetroVision? How does this connect with our, the 2050 plan? I'm wondering, this is just a suggestion as this moves forward to the board, if there's maybe like another slide that you could add that could actually kind of explain the additional work, like in your next steps, maybe kind of also highlight that you're looking to adopt the 2050 plan and the MetroVision and their related dates about related Vision Zero targets. I think that could be helpful.
Thanks, Eileen. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you, Eileen. Are there any additional comments? Hands raised?
No, not at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Then at this time, we'd entertain a motion and a second for approval of this agenda item. Please use your raised hand icon to indicate you would like to make the motion, and you'll be called on and unmuted to verbally state the motion. Cam, do we have a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see a hand raised from Art Griffith. Art, take it away.
I go for 3. I'll make a motion to recommend this RTC.
As it appears on the screen, Art?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Do we have a second? Please raise your hand, Cam.
I do see a second from Phil Greenwald. Phil, please go ahead.
I'd second Art's motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. At this time, we'll vote. Cam, please unmute everyone, or the members. And all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. Any abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. At this time, we'll move into our informational briefings. The first one will be by Steve Cook on the Denver Metro Clean Cities Memorandum. Steve?
Okay, hello. This is Steve Cook, Mobility Analytics and Operation Manager for DRCOG. And I'll just introduce Bonnie Trowbridge from the Denver Metro Clean Cities Coalition. This coalition is a group of more than 100 stakeholders that work to address air quality concerns through clean transportation solutions. Bonnie is a communications professional with years of experience in the nonprofit field and the clean transportation arena through organizations like the National Parks Conservation Association, Girls Incorporated of Metro Denver, Lightning E-Motors, and CalStart. She leads the coalition forward in their efforts to help fleets around the area transition to cleaner fuels and technologies through advice and educational services that range from EV ride and drive events to clean vehicle and alt fuels assessments, grant writing. Bonnie is an avid EV enthusiast who has driven almost all of the electric vehicles currently available on the road, including buses and work trucks. Though, as she points out, she has not yet gotten behind the wheel of an electric street sweeper. But I hope that maybe Sarah Grant from Broomfield might be able to help her with that at some point if they're successful in getting a grant for an e-sweeper for Broomfield. So with that, I will turn it over to Bonnie.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, the e-street sweeper it's hard to say, and it is elusive to me. So if anybody knows where I can get my hands on one, I'd love to take a drive. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and DRCOG TAC. I really appreciate your time today to talk about the Denver Metro Clean Cities Coalition. As Steve mentioned, my name is Bonnie Trowbridge. I'm the executive director here, and I have the great pleasure of working with Robert Spots from the DRCOG transportation team. He's the vice president of our board of directors and a very positive and thoughtful leader for our coalition. So, and I've of course been a personal recipient of many of the great programs that DRCOG has running. So thank you for all you do. Okay, so Denver Metro Clean Cities provides insight and resources for cities and agencies in the Denver metro area. We focus on clean transportation, advanced vehicle technologies, and consumer education, all things that tie into our vision for breathable air in Colorado. We focus on 4 major activities as part of our complementary framework. We have local and national partnerships as part of our Clean Cities network. We convene key community business leaders to develop and implement projects, leverage resources, address barriers. In addition, our national partners leverage Clean Cities resources nationwide to engage with larger fleets and organizations across the US, and in some cases, even internationally. We have information and education as part of our spokes. Clean Cities develops data-driven tools to help consumers save money on fuel costs. We have We work with the national labs to provide data and make sure that their tools are working correctly for the consumers in our own states and regions. We help fleets understand the options for cost-effective alternatives to gasoline and diesel fuel. We have technical and problem-solving assistance. I have a team of 6 people working with me that help our local leaders here in Denver and the Denver metro area address permitting and safety issues, technology shortfalls, other project and implementation barriers. And then we are part of a competitively awarded financial assistance program. So we utilize the federal awards to provide funds to encourage private sector match and long-term investment in clean transportation investments. So we're part of the Department of Energy Vehicles and Technologies Office, and that really is an amazing opportunity for us. That's also where most of the national labs are out of. So we have a great network with some really strong partners there to do research and analysis of vehicles and air quality issues. So as I mentioned, this is a network of Clean Cities coalitions. There are about 90 of us in Colorado and 90 of us in the United States working on similar projects. In Colorado, there are 3 coalitions. There's a Northern Colorado coalition, a Southern Colorado, and then Denver Metro is our metro area coalition. We have the smallest footprint, but the largest number of people. We also have a considerable reach into Southern Colorado in the Colorado Springs area. We are partially funded, as I mentioned, by the Department of Energy, and then we get other funding from federal grants and state grants, partnerships, and we have a great list of corporate sponsors who help us get what we need to get done. So I'm going to show you this list of current projects. I'm not a big fan of boring lists, but I do want you to see that we have quite a few different types of projects. And what I'm really asking for you to look at here is how your cities, municipalities can get back to us. We're really interested in working with you. We'd like to know how we can include your fleets, your sustainability officers in our fleet working groups and our listening sessions. We are working on a project with Colorado State University for mobility and energy improvements. This is a really interesting project where we're testing to see how and to what extent individual vehicle controls and traffic signals and other networked items along the corridor can reduce carbon emissions by working together. So if that's something that someone in your sustainability office is interested in being part of or learning more about, please have them reach out to me. We don't just do electric vehicles, as much as I personally am a fan. I'm also a fan of other ways to reduce emissions in Colorado, and propane has turned out to be a very effective and cost-effective way to do that for many fleets. So we have we're testing a fleet of 5 propane trucks right now, using the latest and greatest technology that's supposed to be technically zero emissions. So we're testing that with the National Renewable Energy Lab to make sure that that's happening here in Colorado. We have a program called EV Watts. Again, a great way for your fleets to be involved. If you have electric vehicles or plug-in electric vehicles, we'd love to talk with your fleet managers about making sure that they're getting the data analysis for free that they can get in this program. And then one of our keystone projects is our Recharge Colorado project, which is a consumer EV education project. And we also work with the Charge Ahead Colorado grant project, which I'm sure that many of you are aware of. Part of that project is Drive Electric Colorado. We kicked this off in 2020, and we are now starting to work with cities and counties that are implementing consumer EV education plans to tie them in with this opportunity. So this is a pretty big project that provides, the biggest thing we're providing that we're working on right now is our interactive website, and we're working with a number of cities in the region to make sure that they're plugged into that and that we're promoting what they're doing in their local areas, as well as connecting them with the best information that's out there about EVs. We'd love to get back to the point where we're doing EV ride and drives. In the time of COVID, that's not really a reality, but it will be soon enough, and we're looking forward to that. We've shifted all of our education and advising to online, as you all know, and so that's been kind of fun. So I'd love to talk with any of you or any of your fleet managers or sustainability teams, EV teams about this Drive Electric Colorado opportunity. So this is my second to the last slide. Again, another list, but I wanted to talk to you about our 2021 plans. I mentioned the Charge Ahead Colorado grant. This is open right now. It's available for anyone who wants to put charging into, especially public locations, but also multifamily locations, apartments, condos, and so forth, and workplaces. So if your municipality, your city is interested in putting in charging, we have coaches that can help you for free. Again, have your people get in touch with us. And then as new vehicles come online, we're going to be doing a lot more ride and drives, not just with the new Mustang Mach-E, of course, the fun ones, and the Leafs and so forth, but also with the East Street Sweepers. So I may actually get my hands on one soon. The whole range there. So if there are ways that we can help you with that, please do let us know. We also do grant writing support. Like right now, the DARA grant, the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act grant is open and is a great opportunity for things like street sweepers. So, we offer free support for municipalities that are looking to write grants. We can help with analysis. We can help, just coaching along those lines, and working groups. And then we also are working on Clean Transportation Summit and Expo, bringing that here to Denver so that fleet managers can get their hands on vehicles, can get behind the wheel, can get under the hood, make sure that they're right for your fleets, and making sure that our fleets here in Colorado, especially the metro area, are using the best and highest technology that we can get our hands on, and that is affordable. So again, my plea to you, I guess not a plea, but my request to you is next steps. Please do have your sustainability and fleet offices get in touch with me. I'd love to talk with them about all the things that I mentioned here and help them make good decisions about ways to reduce carbon emissions from your fleets. So that's it. I know I went pretty quickly there, but any questions?
If you have questions for Bonnie, please raise your hand and Cam will unmute you, and we'll go from there. Cam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do see one hand raised from Phil Greenwald. So Phil, when you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Phil Greenwald again from City of Longmont, representing Boulder County. Bonnie, thanks so much for your presentation. Very great job. And I think we all appreciate the conversion of our fleets, our various fleets, to electric. What I'm just wondering, and I bring this up almost at every meeting, so some of the people on this call have heard this before, and I apologize, but the City of Longmont's really worked hard to take our wastewater treatment plant and convert that methane that's produced into renewable natural gas and usable for our garbage trucks. We've converted a large fleet, and so we're on that track, or on that tact, I guess, of moving toward fleet conversion in that direction, as well as doing our small vehicles to electric. So wondering, are you guys, or does anybody look, I never hear this mentioned, I guess, whenever we're talking about conversion, fleet conversion, and a lot of us are putting a lot of energy and effort into converting fleets to this renewable natural gas, which is also considered low or zero emission vehicle or fuel. So just wondering, are people talking about this, or why isn't this getting more press?
People are talking about it. People with big fleets are talking about it. I think the reason that you're not seeing it more in the press is because it's a very specific application. So not anyone can run RNG. Where it works the best is in the application that you're describing. So you're describing a closed environment, right? You're creating methane, which is then being converted to RNG, which is then being used by vehicles that come back, that are fueled at your site and come back to your site. So, I mean, that's the perfect scenario. It works anytime we can find that scenario. The only thing that we recommend is RNG, because we know it works and it's perfect. In fact, RNG is not just zero emissions, it's negative zero emissions, because you're actually removing methane from the air. And then when you burn it, when you reburn it, I guess, it doesn't create as much emission as it did the first, as much pollution as it did the first time around. So it's actually, there's like if we're talking about a carbon bank, you're banking right there. It's exactly what you should be doing. So I think to answer your question, it's just that it's not, it doesn't affect a lot. There aren't a lot of fleets that can realistically make it happen, unless you're a refuse fleet or wastewater. A lot of the dairies can probably make it work, but it's just a very specific niche.
Great, thank you. I'd love to hear the negative effects. So we're actually negative in as far as emissions go. That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Congratulations. Well done.
Thank you, Phil. Cam, are there any other hands raised?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't see any new hands raised at this time.
Thank you, Bonnie, for your presentation.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yep. And I think at this time, we'll move on to our next informational briefing, which is the Advanced Mobility Partnership, known as AMP. And it's the annual update. And Emily, I'll let you go ahead and present.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One sec. Let me just get this all set up for you all. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Oh, for some reason it's not advancing. All right. Apologies. I realize the irony of this. All right. So I am Emily Lindsay. I'm the Transportation Technology Strategist at DRCOG. That is a lot of words to mean that I work with a lot of you all in our stakeholder and partner agencies on transportation technology projects and planning. And so you all have seen Advanced Mobility Partnership, or AMP, updates on your agenda before. Typically, the TAC representative, Carson, will provide those on a monthly basis just to keep you guys all up to date about what's happening at our monthly working group meetings. But we wanted to give you a little bit more info and do a deep dive into some of the work that AMP has been doing over the last year. And so I know we have a couple folks that maybe haven't heard of AMP. They don't know where it came from. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the background just to kick us off here. So AMP really came from the Mobility Choice Blueprint effort, which happened a couple years ago. This was a planning effort of the same planning partners, so RTD, CDOT, DRCOG, and the Denver Metro Chamber. They kind of came together to do a Mobility Choice Blueprint plan, and this was regional in nature and integrated in scope. And it was really about figuring out how the region could address transportation technology and services that were kind of coming into the region. How do we make sure that we're planning for this proactively to make sure that we're thinking through safety and accessibility and mobility in our region, and making sure that we're using transportation technology to meet emerging mobility opportunities and goals, and make sure that it's kind of in sync. And so in Mobility Choice Blueprint, they look at a bunch of different components, broadly organized by these 7 categories. So you can see it really ranges from things like regional collaboration, to shared mobility, to data, to electrification, even driverless vehicle preparation. And once that plan was completed, folks we're left with kind of a list of 34 different tactical actions. So things we can do to be proactive about planning for transportation technology. And since this process was really collaborative and it was a regional approach that identified very specific actions, we figured we needed a way to implement some of those things. And so AMP was established in late 2019. So it's been around for a little over a year now, with those same partner agencies, with the kind of mission to start to implement mobility choice blueprint. So to look at those tactical actions and think, how can we coordinate, collaborate, and advance these technologies in our region? And so to support the work of the AMP, there's two groups that I'll talk about and refer to. These are the Executive Committee and the AMP Working Group. All right, don't get too overwhelmed by the slide. This is a little bit of information on the structure of the AMP. So I think the thing to focus on here is, again, those two main boxes, that yellow box, the AMP Working Group. They meet every month. There are different members from the partner agencies of AMP, including some folks from our university folks, and different representatives from different groups throughout the region. So bringing in that public, private, nonprofit sector all together. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, TAC actually has a representative on the AMP Working Group, Carson Priest. So that's kind of the monthly folks that do a lot of this work. They report to a quarterly MET executive committee, and this is executive leadership from those partner agencies. So from DRCOG, RTD, CDOT, and the Denver Metro Chamber. And kind of all the other boxes around these represent the different coordination and collaboration that we do, whether it's with our DRCOG folks, so you guys will see yourselves there in that pink box, or with other groups like DRCOG's Regional Transportation Operations Working Group, or other committees. We have a micromobility work group. So there's different components, and we kind of will act in consultation with those groups as needed. So now that we got kind of the background of the AMP, I just wanted to run through a few of the initial activities that we worked through with partner agencies and stakeholders in 2020. Obviously, our very first step early last year was to identify and assemble partners. I think that this is an evolving process. As new companies, new services, new technologies emerge, we're kind of building that list as we go. But we really wanted to conduct some initial outreach and engagement to make sure that we had the right people at the table. And specifically, this is at the AMP Working Group level. And you can see a long list of different types of agencies. Again, they range from our public sector folks. You can see a list in that second column of different communities that have participated. And then some of our nonprofit and private sector members. They're in the first and early second columns. Another fun thing when you start an initiative is to make sure you have a public presence. So we really wanted to make sure that we have somewhere to store all of our resources, emphasizing the fact that this is a partnership and this is not just something DRCOG is doing or CDOT is doing. This is something that we've all come together to build. So if you haven't seen it yet, or you're curious and want to learn more information, that website is advancedmobilitypartnership.org. And we have a variety of pages just talking about the governance structure, some of the projects we're working on. And I think probably the most valuable page is that resources page, which has all of our meeting information, all of our products, deliverables. So take a look at that. And so once we had our identity, our stakeholders all in line, we really wanted to get to work on those tactical actions for Mobility Choice Blueprint. Like I said, there were over 30 of them. And currently, you know, AMP is a partnership, so it relies on existing work and existing staff at agencies. So we wanted to prioritize the tactical actions, not to say that any are not important. I think they were all in the Mobility Choice Blueprint for a reason. But we really wanted to kind of focus our efforts and make sure that we're starting out strong with some foundational items that were meaningful across tactical actions. So we worked with stakeholders in our executive committee to identify some of those prioritized tactical actions. And these all kind of fell into three focus areas: shared mobility, systems operations, and data sharing. And in each one of those colored boxes, you'll see a couple different tactical actions that fall into those focus areas. So these really range in shared mobility from universal trip planning and payment, curbside management, mobility hubs, into systems operations, which I think is probably one of the more broader focus areas, but deals with things like transit priority, smart traffic signal control technology, integrated corridor management, TNC coordination, and then data and data sharing, which I think kind of deals with some of the elements in the previous boxes, but really about regional data sharing and collaboration, figuring out what different components of a platform might be needed or different strategies for data governance to make sure that we're kind of setting ourselves up for success in the future. As we know, transportation technology is pretty synonymous with the collection of large data sets, and the best we can do now is to really plan for that and make sure that we're setting our systems up for success. So as part of this kickoff of looking at these different focus areas, we established steering committees and assembled subject matter experts. So we have a steering committee for each one of these 3 focus areas. And over the spring and summer, they worked together to come up with some work plans and next steps. So they kind of outlined initial activities and roadmaps. Again, this is really the point where they would look at these tactical actions and develop really specific activities associated with them. You know, what are the steps we need to go through to establish a mobility data platform, for example? How are we defining some of these key terms that were presented in Mobility Choice Blueprint? And so the culmination of that was the development of a next steps priority tactical actions document. This really was for us to confirm our priorities, our different considerations moving forward. This is available on the AMP website if folks are curious and want to dig in. And this was brought to the executive committee this fall, where they confirmed some of these priorities. I think it was, the undertone is that we know there are certain foundational items that have to be completed before we can maybe make meaningful progress on some of the other action items. So we wanted to make sure that we're doing those first. And I think it was kind of apparent that while some of these tactical actions, you know, might require significant investment over time, a lot of the initial activities didn't require a lot of initial investment beyond staff time because they were a little bit more on the planning and visioning, kind of setting ourselves up for future implementation. And so some of the work that's been done since the executive committee approved that document is initial work on these priority tactical actions by each area. So for example, the data and data sharing group is working on a discovery document, really laying out what's happening, what is the state of the practice, what are other MPOs and regions doing, and kind of identifying an initial vision so that we can move into that more strategic planning phase after that. But in addition, I think maybe one of the main things that the AMP working group has been doing is really as a forum for coordination, for informational briefings, for conversations around transportation technology related efforts in and around the Denver region. And I just wanted to include a couple of the different topics that we've talked about. This is just a quarter's worth of meetings. So this is about 25% of the informational briefings that we've had at that monthly working group, but it really varies depending either on the month or what's happening in our region, ranging from things like shared micromobility to autonomous transit connection projects to even e-bike pilot programs. So it's a really great place for us to get together to talk about what's going on and to share best practices. I know that was a lot, but if anyone is interested in participating on the working group or learning more, feel free to reach out. It is an open group, so if you have folks at your agencies or if you're working with stakeholders that might be interested, feel free to pass along my contact info. We're happy to invite and have folks participate. If there's projects or pilots that you feel like you'd really like to share with regional stakeholders, we also love to host those. So I guess the long story short is reach out if you're interested in participating or learning more. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Emily. If you have questions for Emily or comments, please raise your hand and Cam will call on you. Cam, do we have any raised hands?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't see any at this moment.
Right. Again, thank you, Emily. We'll move on to our next item, which is the status update of the 2050 Metro Vision Regional Transportation Plan, the 2050 MVRTP. And Jacob, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. So thank you, Jacob Rieger, Dr. Cog's staff, my colleague Alvin and I want to give you an update on what we've been working on relating to the 2050 Metro Vision Regional Transportation Plan, where we're at and what you can expect in the next couple of months ahead. So we're really going to cover 3 topics today, sort of chronologically. I'm going to say a little bit about air quality conformity determination, which was the next step in the planning process after Dr. Cog board approval of the 2050 project and program investment priorities. I'm going to say a few words about the work that we're doing right now to put together the draft 2050 plan document and what you can expect in the public comment review period coming up in February and March. And then Alvin's going to talk a little bit about the financial plan. So just to start with air quality conformity determination, again, the Dr. Cog board approved the 2050 project and program investment priorities at their meetings in November and December. And so the very next step there then was to take those approved projects and the work that we did together on coding our regional traffic model, our focus model, and actually use that to conduct what we call air quality conformity determination analysis. We do that in partnership with CDPHE, particularly the Air Pollution Control Division, known as APCD. They're the ones that actually conduct the modeling and the assessment of air quality conformity. So there's a lot of words on this slide, and I'm not going to read this to you all. You have this in your packet, but I think the bottom line is that, yes, the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan did pass what we call all emissions budget tests. So that means the entirety of the projects that are in the 2050 plan by staging period, by our air quality staging periods in the plan. Each of those staging periods for each of the criteria pollutants passed all emissions budget tests. We will be presenting this information soon to the Air Quality Control Commission. That's part of our planning process every time we do a major update to the regional transportation plan. I want to say a few words about the work we're doing now on the document and the upcoming public review comment period. So just, a few things that we're sort of aiming for as we actually literally put the plan together. We want it to be visually compelling. And I can say this as sort of the primary author of the last 2040 transportation plan. I think the content that we've had in our plan has always been really, really good. But we want the visual piece of it to do that content justice. We want to draw people in and engage people. We want this plan to be visually compelling. And so and I'll show you an example in the next slide of what that's starting to look like. As you all know, being in this business, that sometimes, the work we do can be really technical. The documents we produce can be really technical. So we're aiming to be in this plan really engaging for all audiences and really striking that balance between including everything that we want and need to include, but telling that in a way that people can, our elected officials, our members of the public can sort of grab onto and feel engaged in. As you all know, because you've been such key partners for us in this process, we've done a lot of work together over the past year and a half. We want this plan to tell that planning story about how we all work together to arrive at those project and program investment priorities and all the things that came through that were really important in our planning process. We also want to include the planning framework and the things that this plan needs to include. And we really want to set this plan up to guide implementation. As we've talked about in this forum and other meetings, the plan really does set that long-range vision. It really sets that framework for investment over time. We want this plan to, sort of transition directly into implementation of the region's priorities. So here's just an example. This is work in progress, but just to give you a visual example of just the way that we're, trying to make this very visually compelling, the way that we visually convey information. Hopefully when we put this whole plan together, people will be really excited about it. We want this to be a best practice plan nationwide in terms of how we structure it and how we present information and how we make it accessible for folks to be able to really hopefully be interested in it and engage with it. So we've been working feverishly on putting the draft plan together. I kind of joke that approximately a fifth of the agency is involved, along with the consultant, in actually putting together the draft plan document. We will have that document available in mid-February. I sort of call this the holiday plan The legal notice announcing our public comment review period will be in the Sunday Denver Post on Valentine's Day, and our public review and comment period will actually culminate in a public hearing with our board on St. Patrick's Day. So that's an easy way to reference our upcoming public comment review period. During that 30-day period, we've already lined up a lot of activities and techniques, forums and meetings that we want to speak at. We're talking about doing a sort of a virtual open house, other sort of online and other ways of engaging folks. If you have ideas of meetings that you want us to come present to, or things you want us to do, please feel free to contact me offline or our public engagement specialist, Lisa Hood. We really want to make the most of this 30-day public comment period and do more than we've ever done in terms of getting people, interested and excited, engaged in this plan while it's out for review. And then, as I said, from there, the public hearing will be March 17th in front of our board, and then we are aiming for April board adoption of this plan. As you've heard me say all along, part of what's really driving this assertive schedule or aggressive schedule is that we all have a federal requirement that our partners at Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration actually review and certify our adopted plan by June 27th, 2021. So hopefully with an April board adoption, we're calibrating that schedule to give our federal partners time to do that. So with that, we wanted to give you an update on the financial plan. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alvin, but really the setup for this part of the conversation is that you've seen pieces of, if you think back to your briefings that we've had over the last several months, you've seen pieces of the financial plan, particularly if they related to sort of defining and developing those major project and program investment priorities. Now that we're coming near the end of the plan, we wanted to step back a little bit and give you a little bit more of a holistic sort of presentation of what you'll expect to see in the 2050 financial plan. So Alvin?
Thank you, Jacob. You can go to the next slide. So while we will be discussing revenues and expenditures and finances, we did want to make clear that the MetroVision Regional Transportation Plan isn't like the TIP or the STIP, and it's also not a budget document. It's about developing a funding framework for all of the priority investments that we've outlined through our vision. Since staff were very intentional about soliciting, evaluating, and including a diverse list of multimodal projects, we also wanted to have that same intentionality with the financial plan. So looking at the best resources that are available to implement our regional vision. Next slide. There are three components that we'll be discussing with the financial plan. The first is revenue forecasts. So just figuring out how much revenue we think is available through the plan horizon from different funding types, from different regional agencies, local agencies, federal agencies. The second is expenditure categories, breaking that revenue down into two categories, whether it's going to an individually listed project or it's something that we can take care of in an allocation. And then the third piece is looking at project costs and estimating those out to be able to prioritize the best projects to use the limited regional funding we have available. There were a couple of key takeaways from each of the regional agencies as well as overall. For DRCOG, we rely on CDOT's program distribution to develop our revenue forecasts. Those include our funding sources that you're probably most familiar with through our TIP, our SDBG, CMAQ, or TA funds. We also made an assumption about additional regional revenue. So beginning in 2025, we assumed extra revenue coming to the region from something like a sales tax being passed. On the CDOT side, they had also assumed a high revenue scenario beginning in 2025, so we aligned our regional measure with that. Their revenues were focused on implementing the 10-year strategic pipeline of projects. We worked with RTD early on to develop their own forecasts as well. They updated their forecasts middle of last year to reflect the impact COVID-19 is having on their agency. And similarly, they were prioritizing maintaining and operating the existing system over expansion. And then a couple additional key takeaways. We did make some assumptions about federal discretionary grants. So coming from the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. We coordinated with the toll authorities in the region to make sure we were including their investments, their projects, their programs in the plan. And then when specified, we included project sponsors' funding assumptions for their projects. We break revenues down into these 5 categories that you see on the slide. Like I mentioned, DRCOG administered funding includes funding you're familiar with, SDBG, CMAQ, and TA. It also includes our assumption about additional regional funding. CDOT's administered funding includes funding like the Highway Safety Improvement Program, their program areas related to structures, bridge enterprise, toll revenue. For RTD, that looks at their sales and use tax, fare box revenues, as well as revenues that are coming in for debt service and come in from grants. Other regional system funds are funding that can be spent on our regional roadway system. So this is where we capture our federal discretionary grants, our toll authority funding, as well as any funding that's being spent by the locals on the regional roadway system to either expand the system or preserve and maintain it. And then non-regional system funds capture funding that's spent on the minor arterials, collector roads, and local roads in the region that are being spent by local governments and private developers. In addition to being fiscally constrained throughout the plan, we also need to show fiscal constraint within the plan. So for the 2050 RTP, we've established 3 10-year funding tiers in the plan. So we, through our process, made sure that within each of these 10-year tiers, we were not over-programming projects or spending more money than we thought we would have available within those 10 years. The second piece that you'll recall was figuring out what our expenditure categories are. So looking at our multimodal capital projects, these are our individually listed projects in the plan. They include our roadway and transit capacity projects, so our new roads, our road widenings, our new rapid transit projects. They also include the priority major projects that we identified that are our active transportation projects, our safety and regional vision zero projects, and our freight projects. On the other side are our programmatic investments. So these are just lump sum allocations of the revenue available. We don't list out every sidewalk that's going to be built out to 2050. We don't list out all the bus routes that are being funded out to 2050, but we know those types of investments are occurring in the region. And so this is where you would capture those lump sum allocations. Looking at the 3 regional agencies and that breakdown between those 2 categories, since DRCOG had the most flexibility with their our administered funding, we put the majority of that 3.6 billion towards multimodal capital projects. So those are your road widenings, your transit projects, your major freight projects, your major active transportation and safety projects, and then the remainder goes to those set-asides that we set up within each program. So the freight set-aside, the active transportation set-aside, maintaining our investment in the TIP set-asides that we currently have. For the remaining 2 regional agencies, you can see the majority goes towards those programmatic investments, so where we're not listing individually listed projects. We worked with both CDOT and RTD to figure out what that breakdown would be. And on the CDOT side, that also breaks down to the different program areas and funding types. So we know some funding isn't going to be spent on individual listed projects, but will go towards programmatic investments. And the last piece is estimating project costs. So DRCOG staff rely on planning level cost estimates from the project sponsors. The costs are intended to include all the phases that will get the project to be open for traffic or surface. These are tied to our air quality staging periods for when we do our modeling. This allows us to figure out what the future cost or the year of expenditure cost is for those projects, so we can then prioritize projects with those limited regional funds. An example of what that year of expenditure analysis looks like and how we brought all of that together. On the revenue side, we inflated each year's revenue out to 2050 using an inflation rate that came out of our current federal legislation, the FAST Act. The example table you can see looks at DRCOG's SDBG revenue. And then within the revenue, we then combined 5 years worth of money. So you can see within the 2021 to 2025 period, we have almost $211 million available within that 5-year period. That then gets paired with our project cost analysis. Project costs, which were given to us in current year 2020 dollars, we inflated out using a standard inflation rate as well. Instead of inflating them Each year throughout the plan, we inflated them to a midpoint of a 5-year tier. So in this example, you can see there's a project that in 2020 costs $100 million. It's programmed in the RTP in 2033. So it would use up $135 million of the revenue available between 2031 to 2035. That allowed us to have a more specific fiscal constraint analysis to show we're not over-programming projects in the RTP throughout the plan and then within smaller time segments. Ultimately, that allowed us to show that the 2050 RTP is fiscally constrained, both in current year dollars and year of expenditure dollars. So project costs are not exceeding the forecasted revenue that we anticipate being available. We worked really extensively with staff from CDOT, RTE, our federal partners, the toll authorities, and local governments to make sure that we had the best available information for each agency, for each program, and for each funding type. So with that, we'll take any questions.
If you have questions for Jacob or Alvin Vitale, please raise your hand and Cam will call on you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. At this moment, I don't see any hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you for your presentation. We'll be looking forward to the draft. With that, we'll move on to the informational briefing on unallocated transportation improvement program TIP funding, an update, and I believe Ron is going to kick this one off. So Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ron Papsdorf, Director of Transportation Planning and Operations at DRCOG. Just want to introduce the topic before Todd takes things over. For those that were able to attend our TAC working session on the 11th, most of this will be fairly familiar. We really appreciated folks coming together on quick notice just so we could start this conversation. This process is moving rather quickly given that we unexpectedly have some additional federal resources available to allocate through the TIP waiting list process. So kind of need to get moving quickly. So appreciate everyone's cooperation in that. We heard loud and clear from that group, at least, an interest in having us explore some way that we could have a conversation about making at least the option for local project sponsors to utilize the COVID relief funds at the 100% federal share that's allowed in the provision of that that appropriation of those COVID relief funds. So Todd will talk about our concept on that. The last point I want to make, and it doesn't change particularly the process that's laid out in your staff report, but since the agenda packet went out and the staff report was released, we did find out once Federal Highway Administration released the official apportionment tables for the COVID relief funds that there was a unusual provision in the language for just the COVID relief funds that are being allocated as surface transportation block grants that changes the sub-allocated portion that goes to large urban areas over 200,000 population, so affecting North Front Range MPO, DRCOG, and Pikes Peak area. The way that the sub-allocated portion is calculated because of that provision is based on sort of the total amount of money allocated divided by 2 years rather than by 1 year. So while we had estimated along with CDOT that the sub-allocated portion for DRCOG directed would be about $36 million, the actual official apportionment tables from FHWA based on that strange provision that a lot of us missed in the language is actually more like just under $16 million. So that's the bad news. The good news is in a conversation with CDOT, we've determined that it makes most sense to continue to have that full $36 million go through the DRCOG TIP waitlist process. So that's why I say it doesn't really affect this process, and it actually really doesn't affect the amount of money that will be available, nor does it change the color of the money. So the money is still the COVID relief funds. They still have the same eligibilities under the Surface Transportation Block Grant. That $36 million will still go through the DRCOG waitlist process. So this overall process that we've defined here still applies, just that we had sort of misestimated the amount that would officially be suballocated, and through conversations with CDOT, we agreed that it made most sense to kind of continue to follow this process. So with that, happy to hand over to Todd.
Thank you, Ron and Mr. Chair. So this is quite a unique process for us. For those who've been around for a while, approximately every 2 or 3 TIP cycles, we do need to go through the waiting list process. And it's been pretty standard as of the last few cycles. We have also had on the other side where we have had sort of special funding, the last being ERA about 10 years ago. At that time, it was a little bit simpler because our waiting list was quite small at that time, and the ERA money was quite large in comparison. So we did issue a new call for projects. But I think as we were investigating this process, there was really the need to marry 2 different sets of processes together, especially considering the COVID relief funding is at 100%, and then how to fairly distribute that funding throughout the entire region. So the memo kind of outlines 3 steps that staff is recommending that we follow. The first is being the waiting list process. So this is very standard. This essentially follows what we have already outlined in our TIP policy, in our TIP document. So hopefully starting shortly after this meeting today, which I think will be tomorrow morning, assuming kind of how the rest of this meeting goes, we'll be sending out 2 emails. One is going to be to everyone, and it's sort of just going to be a guide on how we anticipate this entire process to follow. And it should follow very closely to what this memo sort of outlines. The second email will be reaching out to individual project sponsors who has projects on each of the individual waiting lists, and asking them if they wish to accept the available funding. So at this time, each sponsor will be asked to assume if they would like the project, yes or no, and to use the match that was submitted with the project application. So for the time being, the assumption will be that the funding during this step that we have to allocate is not eligible to be at 100%. And we'll come back and pick that up here in step 2. So as outlined in attachment 1 and attachment 2, it contains the current breakdown of the available funding for the regional and the sub-regional process. Attachment 2 contains the waiting list protocols, and it also contains the individual waiting lists. As part of the overall waiting list process, sort of the first step that we typically take, and we've actually already concluded that, is to accept any funding advancements. So asking the sponsors if they wish to move their funds forward, hopefully to complete those projects sooner rather than later. Again, we've already kind of completed that step, but certainly if there's any TIP sponsors out there and you're still wishing to advance your funding, please let us know. We're still willing to accept those. The goal of the overall waiting list process is to allocate all of the funding that is available. So moving on to step 2, which is the sub-regional forum process. And this is really a variant from the waiting list protocol, and it's certainly only due to having the COVID STBG funding that's set up at 100%. So once the projects have been selected from the waiting list, we'll request that each of the sub-regional forums go ahead and meet and decide and recommend how to really best utilize the COVID relief funding. The COVID relief funding is comprised of 68% of the overall funding. And again, that may change slightly if our funding levels do go up or down, but that at this time is what we're projecting. Basically, this step will change the match percentages of some of the projects to allow some projects to be matched at up to 100%. So what staff is envisioning is 3 guiding principles for this process. For a project to receive the COVID STBG funding, it first must be eligible, obviously. So of the current and waiting list projects, only bus service projects would be ineligible to receive the COVID STBG funding, as under the regular STBG funding, bus service projects are not eligible. So again, this is something that we can't get around. This is a federal requirement of the Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. The second sort of guiding principle is that the project must be able to go to add before September 30th of 2022. So this is the end of federal fiscal year 22. And 3, since your entire waiting list funding has already been distributed in the previous step, so essentially your unallocated funding is 0. Whatever COVID STBG funding you assign to, whether it's one project or many projects, this essentially decreases your local match on those projects receiving the COVID funding, for example, maybe from 20% down to 0. Other projects must reduce their DRCOG allocated funding. An example of this is, it effectively increases your local match on those projects. So for example, a project that's already funded at 20% might need to go up to 40%. And again, these percentages are just examples. But the entire concept is, since the entire $53.3 million is already allocated in the previous step, the net result must be 0 in terms of the COVID STBG funding. So just as DRCOG didn't instruct or provide the forum's methodologies to recommend projects during this development of this tip cycle, at this time staff is not providing sort of those details to the individual forums on how to select and recommend which project should receive the COVID STBG funding at up to 100%. So for example, this could be completed through allocating the money to smaller communities, or those who have been hit harder during COVID, to those perhaps already providing overmatch, or perhaps trimming each project's already existing match down to the match minimums, or really any other method your forum can come up with. The entire concept is to push the COVID relief funding out to those projects that you believe should receive it. The overall goal of this step is really to have this completed by Wednesday, March 24th. So we will need to have each forum's either technical committee and or executive level committee go ahead and meet and make those decisions and recommendations back to DRCOG. The third step in this process is a supplemental call for projects. And what we have noticed sort of since we found out there was additional funds available, and some of the waiting lists are rather thin or small, we are making the recommendation that the forums that are not going to have enough projects, therefore hold these supplemental calls for projects. We are asking that these forums still proceed through those 2 previous steps, as outlined in the memo. The COVID relief funding, could go to new or existing projects. So whether it's an existing project that's already funded through that forum, or it's going to one of these new projects that are selected from a new call for projects. And again, to emphasize, we're only requesting that the new calls for projects be held in these subregions that do not have enough waiting list projects to cover the funding that is contained or sub-allocated to them. Let's see. I think another thing to point out is that the projects recommended in these calls for projects would not be eligible for the expanded federal share provision unless they can advertise the construction by the end of 22. So even if a new project is selected through the call for projects, it might not, the COVID relief funding might not necessarily end up going to one of the new projects unless, again, it can be to add by the end of FY22. This is sort of a variant of the existing TIP policy, so we will need DRCOG board approval. We're hoping to begin that process here in the early spring, and then certainly wrap this up by perhaps the fall, so the beginning of federal year 22. So with that, I think I will maybe ask Ron if he had any additional comments that he wanted added before we kind of open this up for questions and comments.
No, I don't at this point, Todd. Let's see what kind of questions and discussion we have.
Okay.
Thank you, Ron and Todd. If you have questions or comments, please raise your hand and Cam will call on you. Cam, go ahead when the hands are raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first hand I saw was from Eileen Yazzie. Eileen, you're no longer muted, so please go ahead.
Sure. This is Eileen Yazzie from Denver. I have a couple questions. Thanks for the write-up. I think, and I know that I sent an email this morning to DRCOG's staff. I think it would have been really helpful and still could be very helpful to see an Excel sheet of actually what an example or the recommendations you're making, what that actually looks like from a holistic perspective as it runs through the filters of the waitlist process. That's just kind of more of a note. The first question I have, I actually put in the chat. So the recommendation about having it go to add by September 2022, if my interpretation of that, that's a policy recommendation. Has this policy been approved?
Eileen, this is Ron. Thanks for the question. So the Colorado Transportation Commission met in special session on January, I can't remember, 5th or 6th, right after the new year. They did adopt a resolution. That resolution suggested, requested, encouraged the MPOs that are selecting projects to allocate most of the COVID relief funds to projects that could go to add by summer of 2021, and that all of the COVID relief funding be expended by the end of by September 30th of 2024. So that's the request we've received from CDOT. We're going to do our best to abide by that request from the Transportation Commission and from CDOT. And quite frankly, because of the fact that all $36 million is not officially sub-allocated to DRCOG to be directed by DRCOG, but CDOT has agreed that for expediency and because of the work that we've done together to run all of the $36 million through the DRCOG TIP process, you know, we're trying to abide by their requests, right? Because the alternative is CDOT could say, we've got $20 million that's not sub-allocated to DRCOG, we're going to pick the projects. And so we're in a cooperative process, as we always are, and working with them. And so that's the situation we're in, Eileen. I hope that helps.
It does help. I think one thing, and I understand the recommendations from CDOT. I will go on record to say on behalf of Denver, while we fully 100% recognize the cooperative partnership, I would also encourage that the flip side that we fully recognize the cooperative partnership of all of the local agencies and municipalities that is part of the DRCOG Transportation Advisory Committee and this region. I think that understanding their expectations, while CDOT is 100% fully ready to accept and flip a lot of their projects to the federal process, so many local municipalities are not. This region is not set up that way. Neither is our local governments for federal aid as it relates to DRCOG and CDOT. So I think that is something to recognize as well. While CDOT can provide great recommendations and we will continue to cooperatively work together, I think there's something to be said about cooperatively working together to ensure success out of a local agency with some of these deadlines to go to advertisement in the summer of 2021 and even in 2022. That it's understandable again from CDOT's perspective, but not necessarily know that I don't know if we collectively as local municipalities are set up for success with the federal requirements and working with DRCOG and CDOT, and I think that's something we can work forward on.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. Just to finish that train of thought, Eileen, I will point out that we all recognize that to accommodate that request from the Transportation Commission, that it means that some, if not most, of the COVID relief funds will go to projects that are already programmed in the TIP, already funded in the TIP, that we're already going to go to add this year or next year. It still means we're adding new projects to the TIP with new money. It's just that most of the new projects that get added from the wait list will be funded with sort of our normal SDBG funds, not the COVID relief funds.
Sure, and going back to my first comment about providing an Excel sheet to kind of walk us through an example of what that looks like, I think that would be very helpful. I think to what you said just now, Ron, is, we can kind of look to or expect that unless we would swap out some funds. I think that's what you were saying, implying. And I think it would be really good to visually see what that actually means, or will that come later?
Yeah, we'll put something together that we hopefully maybe we can use in our email messaging out to folks, and certainly as a guide as we work through with project sponsors and the subregions on this. To the extent that helps folks understand sort of the process in addition to the written description here. So appreciate your suggestion.
And then kind of related to that, to this whole discussion of going to add it by September 30th, the end of federal fiscal year 2022. Well, is that the number one qualifier for, before we even, just looking at the summary, the information material, I feel like that is actually the qualifier even at the regional list and the sub-regional forum. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's, if I understand your question correctly, yes, our intent is in terms of assigning colors of money to projects. So think of it as a color of money issue, not a project issue. We'll program COVID relief money to projects that we have a high level of confidence that they can go to add by the end of 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Cam, do we have other questions? Your hands raised?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The next hand that I saw raised was from Ted Hade. Ted, you're unmuted, so please go ahead when you're ready, and please state the organization you belong to.
Thanks very much. Ted Hyde here with Alta Planning and Design. Todd, thanks for the presentation and the information. Just a quick question about the upcoming sub-regional forums, presumably this spring. Just wanted to find out at a minimum if the minutes from those discussions will be posted on the DRCOG website, or if virtual versions of the meetings will be accessible to attendees who wish to participate.
So traditionally, DRCOG has not sort of posted the individual sub-regional forum meetings. They are required to be, or at least the notices and agendas are required to be publicly noticed. But we certainly can arrange some kind of format so that they are, at least the minutes are more accessible. I do know some forums do have individual websites with their organizations, but that doesn't reflect down to all of them. So I can certainly work with each individual forum to make sure that we're able to post the individual meetings.
Thanks, Todd. I'm going to work within your processes, whatever you had planned, of course. I wanted to find out what that was. So thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Cam, any additional hand raised?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The next hand that I saw was from Jessica Mickelbust. So Jessica, you're unmuted, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to thank Ron for acknowledging the recommendation of the TC. And, CDOT's really excited about these funds coming through, even though, we're presented with some challenging delivery deadlines, of course, but we're happy to dialogue or engage with the local agencies as it makes sense in the process as you're working through kind of the projects and priorities here. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. And if this is Ron, I want to give an acknowledgement to CDOT as well. I think CDOT has recognized that one of the challenges to getting these dollars expended quickly is getting local project grant agreements in place with CDOT and getting design review process done in a timely manner so that we can get projects to add. And to that end, CDOT has agreed that they're intending to bring on some temporary staff, a significant number, to help through those processes over the next couple of years, with the intent to not be a barrier to being able to move these projects quickly. So I think really grateful to CDOT for recognizing that. It's been an issue for a while. A number of new projects and grant agreements will kind of stress the process. So we really appreciate CDOT stepping up and bringing on some additional resources to help us all get through that process. The other thing is I think the local project sponsors, it will be helpful as we work through this process together to think about what kind of time frame it would take you in the kind of grant agreement and project development phases to be able to sort of meet tight time frames. What kind of turnaround times would you need? I think documenting that and sharing that with CDOT will be helpful as well.
Right.
Thank you, Jessica and Ron. Cam, additional?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The next one is from Deborah Basket. So Deborah, when you're ready, please state the organization you're a part of and go ahead.
Thank you. This is Deborah Basket with the City of Westminster, and my question has been answered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
That is all the hands I see at this time. I just saw a hand get raised by Alex Hyde-Wright. Alex, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Alex Hyde-Wright with Boulder County. I guess I still have a question on the reduction in federal funds for one project if another project in a subregion is able to use the increased federal funding. So the way that it tends to work right now, since the dollar amounts available to each subregion don't line up perfectly with the end of a project, is that the last project to receive funding usually receives a partial funding because they're essentially getting whatever money is left by the time the federal money works its way down the list to them. And so with the new COVID relief funding, is is if all the projects that are going to get new funding say yes or no on the wait list based on the 80-20 split, and then that will still likely leave the last project that's getting any federal funding as a partial a partially funded amount, and it'll have to that project sponsor will have to accept or decline based on that amount. And then if projects ahead of it in line receive any increased federal share, then that last project in line that's receiving partial funding would then likely see its partial federal funding further reduced. And so would that last project, be able to change its, or would that sponsor be able to change its mind from accepting to declining the funds if they're, if they would accept, if they're getting funded at 50% level, they could do the project, but then if that went down to 35% based on the increased funding getting used up higher up on the list, would they be able to then decline the funds without penalty?
Yeah, Alex, this is Todd. I mean, I think overall, I mean, it is part of the overall funding or forum discussion. So certainly once you accept the funding, you're not locked in per se. If you do say yes, it does become a project, but certainly there is no restrictions or there's nothing standing in that sponsor's way to say, oh, we'll go ahead and turn the funding back because we no longer have the amount of match that's required. So that certainly may be a scenario where a project is funded off the waiting list in step one, and then depending on sort of the actions of the overall forum in step two, that sponsor no longer wishes to fund that project. Of course, then we'd have to sort of go back to the waiting list if there were remaining projects to see if that next sponsor in line would like to go ahead and accept the funding.
So, Alex, Todd, this is Ron. Because Todd's answer is absolutely correct. I might just state it a little bit differently. It is admittedly a little bit of an iterative process, to be sure, and it was the only way that we could come up with to sort of address tax interest in having an opportunity to utilize the COVID relief funding at 100%. And you heard the trustee from Lions weigh in that they support that opportunity. We think that conversation is best had at the sub-regional level. It doesn't change the amount of federal funds available as a target amount for recommendation from each of the subregions to the board in terms of what projects to fund from the wait list. But to the degree that a subregion collectively decides that they want to use some or all of the COVID relief funding at 100% federal share, then that does mean that fewer projects in total can be funded with that available federal money. Because all of our TIP projects and TIP waitlist projects, the vast majority, are assumed with some non-federal share component. Typically 20%, but it varies from project to project based on the original TIP application that the sponsor submitted. So if you'll bear with me for a minute, if you had a subregion that had $5 million as the target available amount of COVID relief funding, and they had 3 projects that could use the money, a $3 million total project cost, a $2 million total project cost, and a $5 million project cost, and they all had proposed 50% local, 50% federal share. With that $5 million of COVID relief funding, you could fund all 3 of those projects. Mm-hmm. But if 2 of the projects said, and the subregion agreed that they wanted to allow the use of 100% federal share, they would use up all of the available federal, and one of those 3 projects wouldn't be able to be funded. Mm-hmm. And we think that conversation should be had at the subregional level.
Okay, and I think the clarification that it will be an iterative step or an iterative process between step 1 and 2 is what I was looking for, because I think that is how it'll play out, where DRCOG will be reaching out to projects that will be able to be funded, and so you know, usually the last project in line in all the subregions will likely receive partial funding because the dollar amounts probably don't line up perfectly. And then if that sponsor agrees to accept the funding, I guess I was wary of them being locked in if they accept the funding with under the understanding of some dollar amount, and then if the increased federal share goes to projects further ahead of them in line, then that last project is going to be looking at a decreased federal amount. And so that like kind of the information available to them would have changed.
Correct.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification. And then I guess I kind of wanted to query my fellow TAC members on the desire appetite to look at this process for the regional share, or if the regional projects would just remain at the 80-20 federal local, and then the increased federal share would just be looked at in the individual sub-regional forums.
That's a good question, Alex. This Kent. If you have some comments on what Alex just asked, please raise your hand, and Cam will call on you.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Ron. I'll take a stab first before you open it up to the rest of the TAC. I would suggest that since the regional share projects are fully debated and recommended and adopted by the full DRCOG board, not recommended by any particular sub-region, that DRCOG staff will work with the project sponsors for the regional share waitlist projects and work to come up with a recommendation for the board to consider, and then the board will make that decision ultimately.
Okay, that's a good point, Ron. Thank you for reminding us that the board approved the regional ones. Cam, are there any additional hands raised?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do see a hand raised from Art Griffith. So Art, when you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So if you had a project, the only way you could spend any COVID relief funds within that time period would be on design and right of way. Can you use those for the funds for that phase at like an 80-20, or a lot of our projects are 50-50 funded, Ron? And I'm wondering, how do we take advantage of these COVID funds, but let's say that all of our projects are for 2023 or so, or we don't use those funds, then will we lose out on that portion being available for a backup project? I'm still a little confused on the two-step dance here. I mean, if you can't use the funds in 21 or 22.
So Art, if I'm understanding your question, again, the timing and sort of the color of money issue does not change the amount of the total of new funding that is available to the region to allocate to projects. We've got $53 million to allocate to projects through the TIP, primarily the TIP waitlist process. That doesn't change. So we'll be able to fund $53 million worth of projects off the waitlist, essentially. So
okay, so
you know, at the base level, the color of money issue is sort of more of a process where we'll be working with the subregions project sponsors and with CDOT and DRCOG staff to sort of figure out the best projects to allocate the COVID relief money portion of that $53 million. Many of those projects are already funded in the TIP. So what it's doing is it's freeing up existing anticipated federal funds to go to waitlist projects.
Okay, so
makes sense.
Yeah, that helped quite a bit, but just to simplify, so the 4 million in the tables that are designated for Douglas County, that number doesn't get reduced if we can't use COVID money in 21 or 22. We can still just go to our waiting list and allocate as much as that as possible.
Yeah, I think that money will get used on likely if you don't have waitlist projects, and most subregions don't have very many, if any, waitlist projects that we would have a high level of confidence could go to add in 21 or 22, right?
Correct.
Right, because people haven't spent a lot of time developing those projects because they weren't funded in the TIP round. And rightly so. Why would you spend a lot of money developing a project that's not currently funded? So in that case, that COVID relief money will go to projects that are already programmed, already funded, that we're going to go to add in 21 or 22 anyways. You still have the same amount of money for the subregion as a target amount to recommend to fund projects off the wait list.
Thank you.
It's just a different color of money.
Thank you for confirming that. That's what my assumption was. I just didn't know how far out on the limb I was going. So
I've got the saw right here for you.
Thank you, Art, for the question. Are there additional hands raised, Cam?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I actually see a question has been posed by Eileen Yazzie. Eileen, would you like to say your question?
Yeah, sure. I think this relates to statusing the projects, and it kind of relates to what a lot of us have been talking about and kind of moving through the region, sub-region, changing out the color of money and things like that. Do we have an agreed upon kind of milestone for developing federal projects? We got an IGA process, we've got design process, we've got environmental requirements, a right-of-way clearance, a utilities clearance, 90%, all these different clearances and our milestones, however you want to say it. Do we have an agreed upon timeline or time frame related to those items that could really help this process and these projects with CDOT, local agencies, and DRCOG all kind of be on the same page to kind of meet that 2022 deadline and understand if and when we need to swap out funds? Do we have anything like that?
So this is Todd. CDOT does have a local agency manual, and they also have, within the last year or two, updated sort of the timelines that go along with that. I believe it's just an estimated timeline. There's really not anything sitting out there that I'm aware of, and maybe CDOT can correct me, that really states this is exactly how long it's going to take with CDOT. I mean, it's just an estimate. But I think the piece that's really missing is that every local government or any other entity that really works with CDOT through an IGA, their process is different. To my knowledge, most IGAs can take anywhere from 4 months to 9 months. So it really depends on the agency. And I think it's not just the IGAs, it's also all the other sort of things that go along with that. It just, some local agencies might take longer or shorter depending on the type of project or the entire depth of what's involved in the project.
Thank you.
Do you have any additional hands raised?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do see a question from Myron Hora. So Myron, I'm going to unmute you. So when you're ready, please go ahead.
Okay, before I begin, is it okay if I ask a question? I'm not a TAC member.
Go ahead and ask, Myron. We'll decide whether we answer it later.
Okay. Hey, I just, listening to the conversation, it really is about color of money. So, there's the comments made about, well, if the first couple of projects use up all the stimulus funds, that last project may not get as much. But because you're doing a color of money thing, really, if any project was to get anything less, it would be the added projects, right? Because everybody in line would continue to get their full federal funding, if not COVID, regular federal funding. until you get to that very last project on your waiting list. And then since you're doing this with a color of money, would you be open to looking at it as a DRCOG region and maybe doing some movement between the sub-regions to make sure you effectively spend the COVID money, but everybody still ends up with their share of federal money? Thank you.
Thank you, Myron. I think that, Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you're saying, is that we'll spend that money, but we'll shift money around on TIP projects as need be. Is that correct?
That's correct. Myron, well, thanks for joining us today. I will say, typically we don't allow questions from the floor from non-members and alternates during the debate. A little harder to handle that during these virtual meetings, but appreciate everyone's perspectives, and so I think it's fine with the chair's concurrence. Myron, your first statement is correct, and in terms of sort of no project that's currently funded in the TIP is going to get shortchanged. The only question is how many projects from the wait list can be added to the TIP if very many projects take the 100% federal share COVID relief funding for existing projects. So that's the dynamic at play. And every sub-region will have, regardless of color of money decisions, they will have sort of the target amount available to make their funding recommendations to the board with.
Thank you, Ron. Cam, any additional questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just saw a hand raised from Jessica Meckelbust. So Jessica, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, if I may jump back to Eileen's question, that was a really great one about how long things take. Do we have some standard timeframes? And then, Todd's response on the IGA. So as much as we wish we did have, standard amounts of time that it takes to get through, for example, the environmental process, we don't have those, but we are happy to sit. That was a little bit to my comment earlier. We're happy to sit with the local agencies and kind of talk through those federal requirements, maybe brainstorm some ways to streamline or be more efficient. But it's just hard to know, with the new SUE requirements, some projects require that, some of them don't. So it's difficult, although we do want to be a partner with the local agencies and help kind of navigate that process. And as far as the IGAs, we're really working to draw that time frame back from 9 months. We'd love to see it be shorter. That was part of the commitment to bringing on some additional staff to support that effort. And with the IGA language, the fewer changes we can adopt always helps it go a little bit faster as well. So just want to put that plug in there. But we are working to draw that length of time down from that 9 month kind of longer window. So I just wanted to add those in as kind of resources for everyone. Thanks.
And Mr. Chair, this is Ron again. I did post in the chat for everyone the link to the local agency manual. It was officially adopted in 2006. It's been most recently updated in 2020. So I would encourage local project sponsors, if you've never looked at the local agency manual, you should have. But if you haven't, please go look at it. I think that it's got a lot of good information to help you. And I will reinforce Jessica's statement. The less, or if none at all, kind of changes to the standard boilerplate IGA language a local sponsor suggests, the faster your agreement will go. Because the reality is, any change to the boilerplate requires Attorney General's office review, which takes time.
Thank you, Ron. Any additional speakers that are members, Cam?
I do see a question. Yes, Mr. Chair, I do see a question from Alex Hyde-Wright. So Alex, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that my hand was still up. I don't have a question.
Okay, thank you, Alex.
In that case, Mr. Chair, I don't see any hands or new questions posed at this time.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll end our informational briefings, and move on to the administrative items. The first to ask Carson Priest, did you have any additional update on AMP that you wanted to provide us?
Mr. Chair, I don't think so. I think Emily covered it really well, and I'll be providing the updates as we go forward this year.
Okay, thank you. And then, are there any other matters or members' comments? If so, raise your hands. And Ron, I believe you had one announcement you wanted to make.
I think that was Steve Cook, Mr. Chair.
Oh, Steve Cook. Okay, excuse me.
All right. Hello. I just wanted to let folks know out there that our new version of our Focus travel demand model is officially available now. So we've already notified a lot of the consultant community since they normally are the ultimate users of that. I wanted to let people on the TAC know that too, and we'll be sending something out about that too. So I know several of you, including Kent, have some studies or plans, master plans coming up where you're going to have consultants using the model, and we know they've been lined up out the door, and it's officially available now. I mean, the one note we are making, at least for NEPA studies that need ultimately a federal decision, is that it's still going to be a couple months, as Jacob noted earlier, before the board adopts the regional transportation plan, and that's when it really becomes, I don't know, authenticated. But barring any major, issues over the next couple of months, we're 99% confident that this is the model, and folks who need to get going with studies can now get started and use the new model.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any other matters to come before the TAC from the members?
Mr. Chair, Eileen Yazzie just raised her hand. So Eileen, I'm going to unmute you, and when you're ready, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Last comment, I hope, for myself and for everybody else of this meeting is wanted to, and I'll post this link in the chat, is the U.S. Department of Transportation, the BUILD grant. They did post on Friday that they are updating the federal fiscal year 2021 NOFO, and they will have it posted prior to April 26th. And while that April 26th seems far away, I'm wondering if on a future agenda item for the TAC that we're able to put this item on there and maybe have kind of a open regional discussion and see what members are doing, what CDOT's doing, RTD, any other member agencies have thoughts of what people are thinking about related to the bill. I think it could be a good place, this meeting, this forum, to collaborate and understand what people are doing in our region related to that.
Thank you, Eileen.
And Mr. Chair, yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do see a hand has been raised by Art Griffith. So Art, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Yeah, not to backtrack, sorry, just a little bit, but regarding the sub-regional meetings, if we're all in alignment, to how we want to just use our project on the backup list, can we just have kind of an informal meeting? Like if we collect emails, is that sufficient for DRCOG, or are you really thinking how formal a meeting do we have, since we all seem to be aligned in using the backup list? I'm sorry, I'm backslid a little bit, but.
Art, my friend. Yeah,
I know.
Important question, and I appreciate you posing the question. I don't want to answer too quickly. I just want to be thoughtful before I just answer off the cuff. For tip purposes, we treat the sub-regional forums as extensions of the board of directors, and for that reason, and because the subregions are making recommendations to the board, I think we're going to need some formal meeting to get a recommendation from the subregions.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Art. Any other hands raised, Cam?
No, Mr. Chair, no more hands raised at this time.
Our next meeting will be February 22nd, 2021. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.